So let's talk about love and healing. I'm going to start this section by reading just a very brief passage. It's from page 261, in which Ryu is watching his friend Grand. Grand, you might remember, is the writer, the one who struggles with his words, who's writing the same sentence over and over again about the young woman riding a horse. And Ryu is watching, he's commenting on it being Christmas time and how different things are, and he's watching Grand, who is normally fairly stoic. He's watching Grand staring at a store display filled with toys and other presents for Christmas time. He says, and he knew also what the old man was thinking as his tears flowed, and he, Ryu, thought it too, that a loveless world is a dead world, and always there comes an hour when one is weary of prisons, of one's work, and of devotion to duty, and all one craves for is a loved face, the warmth and wonder of a loving heart. What do we need as human beings? Camus is making room here. For that most human experience of connection. He, of course, is making it in a typical way, which is from the vantage of memory and exile. In Grand's case, exile from those beautiful people in his life. Exile, disconnection from what was in the past and what it is no longer. I'll tell a quick story that happened to me this last week. It didn't happen to me, I witnessed. I mentioned that I've been working with people who are out on the front lines fighting this pandemic, and really in the sense of trying to get them to pay attention to what they're feeling, right? And to make sure that they're attending to what they need. And I was with a group this week, and they were in a room sharing their experience. We were actually talking a little bit about gratitude. And one of them said, she says, I know I shouldn't, but I'm grateful for the illegal hugs that I've gotten from my colleagues this week. That's the context of a group of people who know how dangerous human contact is, physical contact is now. They know better than anybody else in the city or in the region. And yet they still, in moments together, gave and received hugs, that physical contact. There's nothing rational about that, right? And I have to say I was incredibly proud of the people in the room who had the power to be angry about what they just heard. And they weren't. They may have been, but they knew that something else was going on there. These people who are doing really super heroic work. There's something irreducible about human contact. We can't train ourselves out of it. And beyond the human physical contact, it's the need for human connection. And Camus gets it here. All one craves for is a loved face, the warmth and wonder of a loving heart. We're coming to the end of the plague in Oran, and we start to see the word hope appear in the text. This is a reflection on, this is Ryu speaking as narrator. He says, though his days were no less strenuous than at the height of the epidemic, the prospect of imminent release had obliterated his fatigue. Hope had returned, and with it a new zest for life. No man can live on the stretch all the time, with his energy and willpower strained to the breaking point, and it is a joy to be able to relax at last and loosen nerves and muscles that were braced for the struggle. So, I'm speaking this here on the 13th of April, and we are told that we are still 2 weeks away from the high water mark here in the region, and it is public knowledge now that there is a hospital set up at NRG Stadium, and while the high water mark for the country may have been hit in this initial surge, it's still coming for us. So I don't think that we're quite where Ryu is here. So it's good to hear that there will be a time, not far from now, when we can begin to stretch and relax and loosen nerves that were braced for the struggle. I spent this first part of this week's lecture talking about Teru and Teru's path of sainthood, of sympathy, and of a yearning for peace. And in the novel, of course, Teru dies. Teru dies of the plague. He's a late victim, and Ryu and his mother care for him, and they watch as he dies. Ryu reflects on his relationship with Teru and what he's witnessed. He says, he knew, too, that to love someone means relatively little, or rather, that love is never strong enough to find the words befitting it. Thus he and his mother would always love each other silently. And one day she or he would die, without ever, all their lives long, having gone farther than this by way of making their affection known. Thus, too, he had lived at Teru's side, and Teru had died this evening without their friendships having had time to enter fully into the life of either. Teru had lost the match, as he put it. But what had he, Ryu, won? No more than the experience of having known plague and remembering it, of having known friendship and remembering it, of knowing affection and being destined one day to remember it. So all a man could win in the conflict between plague and life was knowledge and memories. But Teru, perhaps, would have called that winning the match. Boy, there's so much in this passage. Love is that which escapes our ability to translate it into words, right? It's interesting Camus doesn't give that to us as some sort of transcendence. It's spoken as a kind of lament that there's not enough to adequately express it. We might recall that Ryu told us that one could not cure and know at the same time. And now he's telling us that winning the match means knowledge and memories. So that as the plague comes to an end, we are left with knowledge. As the curing ends, we are left with knowledge. Knowing, and we're going to hear a little bit more about this in a moment, knowing in this sense, I think, is experiential. Knowing the plague means experiencing the plague. Knowing friendship means experiencing it. Knowing affection means experiencing affection. Particularly in the discussions and in these lectures in the past, we've talked about nostalgia, this yearning for an imagined past, a past that more than likely never really happened. Ryu here is talking, I believe, about something different when he invokes memory. It's an experience that has its own truth and its own living truth. So I'm going to read a little bit more length here. This is from page 292. How hard it must be to live only with what one knows and what one remembers, cut off from what one hopes for. It was thus, most probably, that Tarrou had lived, and he realized the bleak sterility of a life without illusions. There can be no peace without hope, and Tarrou, denying as he did the right to condemn anyone whomsoever, though he knew well that no one can help condemning, and it befalls even the victim sometime to turn executioner. Tarrou had lived a life riddled with contradictions and had never known hope's solace. Did that explain his aspiration towards saintliness, his quest of peace by service in the cause of others? Actually, Ryu had no idea of the answer to that question, and it mattered little. The only picture of Tarrou he would always have would be the picture of a man who firmly gripped the steering wheel of his car when driving, or else the picture of that stalwart body now lying motionless. Knowing meant that, a living warmth, and a picture of death. Saintliness, Camus tells us, is the quest of peace by service in the cause of others. One thing that connects for me briefly about that reflection is the writing of somebody else in that era, a little bit more in the 60s, the French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. And he too, in that era, is thinking of a term that it's tough to use the word altruism. It's a compelling experience of connectedness with others, such that one's own life is means less than their life does. That our life is subject to their life, and it was in the interest of it really was an unconscious response. It isn't a logically arrived at conclusion for Levinas. It's this primal urge. He understood the ethics to be before philosophy. That primal sense of our own connectedness to others and the ways in which we can't exist without their existence. I'll also mention here too that, as you know, Camus talks about the bleak sterility of a life without illusions. It made me reflect a little bit on the notion of illusion and its connection to the imagination. So, and I just feel like I want to say in a clarifying way and maybe towards more conversation, that I feel that illusion is an experience of the imagination. But the imagination is not illusion, right? So illusion is a kind of imaginal experience, and there are other kinds of imaginal experiences that have different kinds of connection to the vitality or the truth of living. There are other ways of imagining that don't involve escape,